right, we're going to try something a little bit different. I recently read a book called Getting Things Done by David Allen. Reread it, that is. First read that book probably in 2008 or 2009. And I'm not going to do a book review because no one actually cares. It's obnoxious. Just read the book. I don't want you to read my review. But what I am going to do is talk about to-do lists, prioritization, task management, all that kind of stuff, because that's something that I think about all the time because I have a strange brain that enjoys such processing of information. So when we think about to-do lists, most people are essentially trying to accomplish a few things by making a to-do list, right? We're trying to not forget things. There's so many things going on all the time. You know, it's like, oh, I need to make sure I send this email. I need to make sure that I take out the trash every week. I need to make sure that I schedule a dentist appointment. I need to make sure that I clean out this closet that's been bothering me for a while. I need to make sure I complete this project for work. There's just so much stuff going on. So we know that it's probably too much for us to think about. So we try not to forget it by making lists. And then the other thing we need to be able to do is actually prioritize what's happening, right? That list of tasks I just kind of rambled and made up included things like clean a closet and get an important project done for work. Obviously, the most important things should be done first or when you have the most energy, and we shouldn't be screwing around doing stuff that doesn't matter as much. So essentially with to-do lists and task management systems and all that kind of stuff, we're trying to keep track of stuff and we're trying to be able to prioritize it. What I see most people do when they're actually making these kinds of lists or thinking about their task management, I mean, number one is people just think they'll remember stuff. I remember this as a child in elementary school. We had an assignment notebook and we had to actually write our assignments in it. And it was like, okay, you need to make sure that you have this homework done for reading and you have to make sure you have this homework done for math. And as a fourth grader or whatever, I was like, this is ridiculous. I will just remember this. And I could remember it because it was pretty easy to sort of think through the order of classes that I had in a day and then just remember what the homework assignment was for each of them. And whether or not I did the assignment, which I probably did in elementary school, I think I was a pretty avid homework doer until a certain point in my life when I developed something of a rebellious streak. But, you know, it wasn't that hard to just think through and remember what I had to do. But for most people, they think, oh, okay, cool, yeah, I'll just remember that. And then they don't. And what ends up happening is we follow this sort of like cycle of forgetting things and then having them pop up and then having to deal with the urgent issue at hand because you forgot to do it. And then you're just kind of constantly putting out fires because you're always forgetting things. So people think they'll remember, they don't actually remember, things pop up, and then you have to suddenly deal with it because it's now urgent. The other thing that people do is make extensive lists that are unprioritized, they're unsorted, and then they become super, super messy. And that kind of list becomes numbing to look at, right? I think we've all had that experience where it's like, okay, here's the pile of things that I need to sort. And I know that that's kind of a nebulous task that's going to require a ton of energy. So I'm just not going to sort it. And like, you kind of look at it and you're like, yeah, I should probably, you know, go through that pile of files that need to be organized, but like, that's going to take a long time. And I don't even really know what needs to be done. Eventually you just become numb to it. It just becomes noise in the background, just like, you know, a hum from a machine in a room that you're working in. You just eventually get used to it, right? Some sort of bad smell that when you first walk into a room, you smell it. And then after a little while, you just kind of tune it out as background. So these large unsorted lists that are kind of randomly stacked around very quickly become something that you just aren't even thinking about. And then when you do need to find something, it becomes an entire task in and of itself to sort through those lists and figure out what's actually going on. So the two extremes are people tend to think they'll remember stuff, they don't remember it, then they forget it, or just kind of list everything and there's no real sorting mechanism. And then it becomes very challenging to actually get anything from those lists. A lot of people do have some sort of intuitive sense of effectiveness and prioritization, right? And by effectiveness, I mean the term that Peter Drucker sort of popularized when he was talking about the differences between efficiency and effectiveness. Efficiency being doing things well, and effectiveness doing the right things. There's obviously things that are more important than other things, and most people have an intuitive sense that may just come from emotion, or may come from something popping up and being urgent, or may come from a sense of being in trouble, or may come from a sense of internal priorities like, okay, well, I actually care about my job this much, or I care about my training schedule this much, or I care about my music this much that I'm just going to do this thing at the expense of other things. So what we want to be able to do is remember tasks so they don't become these sort of mind-numbing lists, and we want to be able to easily sort them by effectiveness. And David Allen has a pretty fantastic system for doing that called Getting Things Done, which is relatively agnostic as far as software or principles of doing it. I don't mean principles, I mean systems of doing it, but the principles are kind of universal. So when he originally published the book, which is, I believe, the one that I read, it was pre a lot of digital applications and all that kind of stuff. So the system was intended to be paper-based. And when I first read it, I remember using an app called Toodle-Do that I'm not sure if it exists anymore. But that was set up quite well to handle the system. So it's relatively agnostic in terms of how it's implemented, but the goal is to be able to capture tons of tasks and then actually sort them in a way that it's helpful to have these lists rather than just another overwhelming thing that makes you feel bad because you're not actually accomplishing anything. And you look at it and you're like, oh, geez, this isn't going particularly well. So something that's pretty interesting for me, having first read the book in probably 2009 or so, and rereading it in 2017, is at this point, I have so much more to do at any given time than I will ever be able to accomplish. In 2009, it was probably realistic for me to reach some sort of endpoint where it's like, okay, cool, I have completed all my tasks. You know, at that point in my life, I did not own a business. I did not own two businesses. I was in bands and I had a job that, you know, was cool, but wasn't particularly challenging in terms of the amount of workload that I had. So it was realistic for me to actually at some point be like, okay, cool. Like I have accomplished everything I need to do, and then just kind of sit back and, well, not relax, but probably read something or play guitar or engage in some sort of information hoarding behavior or weird self-improvement project. But now there is an endless list of stuff for me to do. No matter what I do, I will not accomplish it. And that is personally challenging, right? There was a point probably in 2013 or 2014 where I really had to come to terms with that concept, since first opened South Loop Strength and Conditioning in 2012. And relatively quickly after that, you know, my to-do list just became constantly overwhelming. So for me personally, to deal with that endless to-do list was very challenging, since I'm someone who likes to organize things and check them off and complete stuff, and I just couldn't do it anymore. I was like, all right, cool. No matter what you do, you will always have some little software bug that needs to be cleaned up, some email that needs to be responded to, something that's wrong with the layout of the gym, some marketing plan that you need to execute, some piece of content that you need to create. There's just an endless possibility of stuff I could be tweaking or fixing, or new projects that could be starting. And so I'm still not really fully comfortable with that. It's still uncomfortable for me to really look at, you know, my list of projects or my list of to-dos. I still kind of always feel like a slight nagging sense of not doing enough or needing to do more or being a little bit more disorganized than I would like. But I've worked hard internally on not letting that be something I'm thinking about or something that's affecting my decisions. It's just like a slight discomfort lurking in the back of my mind. But since rereading Getting Things Done, that's really changed how I approach the work that I'm doing. Because with this overwhelming list of to-dos, thinking about organizing them is so much different than when it was like, okay, there's an actual discrete amount of things that I could be accomplishing, and then at some point I may actually check them all off, and then I can sort of move on from there. So I personally use Asana as my task management and project management system. And there's a lot of great stuff about Asana. There's a lot of things I would change. But I know a lot of people utilize other systems and use them just as effectively. I use Asana because we use it for project management at the gym. It enables a certain amount of collaboration that's very helpful. And I've also sort of built my systems in Asana. And there's certainly, you know, I don't know what the right word is, a moat, so to speak, of once you start using a certain task management software, you get all your stuff in there, and then taking it out is pretty nasty. So I like Asana quite a bit. I've utilized some of the custom fields features and all that kind of stuff to really make it work for my system and the way that I've kind of implemented the Getting Things Done processes. But I do know other people use things like Evernote or OmniFocus and like those a lot as well. But when we get back to David Allen's stuff, he had a few very key insights that I know for me pretty much immediately changed the way I thought about work in 2009. So one of his most powerful insights is thinking of tasks as next actions. So a lot of people will have things on their to-do list like dentist or redesign website or something like that that's kind of like nebulous and large and unclear what actually needs to happen. So one of his most important insights was processing all tasks and projects down into their very next action. So if we take the example of dentist, the next action may be call dentist and schedule an appointment. The next action may be research dental insurance to figure out which dentists are covered, right? The next action may be text a friend and ask for a referral to a dentist in my area. All these things are actual actions that can be taken rather than just having dentist on a list, which requires a certain amount of cognitive energy to actually figure out what you need to do. And it's really easy to allow things like dentist or website redesign to pile up, because when you're looking at your to-do list and it's not clear actions and you actually have to spend additional cognitive energy parsing out what needs to happen from a sort of nebulous list item, then it's really easy to become numb to it and just ignore it and let it sit there. So it's something I pretty much started implementing right away when I first read the book, and that's unbelievably profound to think through items in terms of next action rather than just nebulous tasks. One of his other major insights is sorting items on your to-do list by context. So he talks a lot about how our brains are pretty good at coming up with ideas and things to do, but not very good at reminding us at an appropriate time. So I think we've all had the experience of, going out on some errands and then coming home and be like, oh my God, I just totally forgot to go get a shovel, which was potentially one of the main reasons you even went on the errands, but you decided to stop at, the grocery store first, and then you decided to drop off some mail at the mailbox, and then you started looking at your phone and got some text messages and texted some people back, and then looked at your calendar and then hurried back home. And then you're like, wait a second, I just did not go get a shovel, which is why I even left the house in the first place. So our brains are not very good at remembering the right thing to do at the right time. And they're actually very good at remembering something to do at a time when we can't do anything about it. So we're constantly getting reminders of random tasks that need to be done, emails that need to be sent, stuff that we forgot to do, as well as, the sort of standard perseveration and worrying about what people think of us and what our social status is and whether or not we're going to accomplish something that we think we should accomplish or what someone said about us earlier in the day. So this just kind of noisy nonsense that comes from our brain is just really not very helpful, especially when it comes to doing tasks at the right time. So David Allen recommends using context to organize our to-do list. So in that sense, that refers to, say errands could be a potential context. And in that context, you can list everything you need to do when you're sort of out of the house driving around, right? So for example, for me, I recently put renew my library card on my errands context to-do list. So hopefully the next time I'm out, I'm going to have a hard time remembering to renew my library card. But it's relatively easy for me to be like, okay, I'm doing errands, pull up a list of errands that need to be done, see renew library card, and then decide whether or not that's something I can actually take on at that given time, right? Other contexts that are helpful are something like computer. So computer is obviously a massive part of a lot of people's lives these days. And there's so much different stuff that needs to be done. And we may have literally dozens of projects that can be done on the computer, but it's really easy to then say, okay, cool. I'm at my computer. I have this amount of time. Let me look and see what the potential options are for me for things for me to do at my computer. And then I can filter them and decide what actually matters. I personally split my computer tasks into 3 different buckets. So I have computer tasks that are not requiring the internet, right? So stuff that I can do on software, maybe some image editing or audio editing or photo editing, stuff like that doesn't require an actual internet connection. I have sort of general online administrative tasks, so stuff that would be involved with email or potential research of things or just kind of like logging into various sites, paying bills, updating information. And I also have things that use online software, right? So we use Zapier a lot at the gym, which is a task automation system. Essentially, it allows you to connect APIs for various different pieces of software, and they can pass information back and forth. And so we use Zapier a ton. Zapier is kind of not necessarily always an administrative type of task. It requires thinking through different ways of funneling data around. So it's kind of a higher order type of task that tends to be done on Zapier, or potentially working on updating WordPress sites and recoding things that are a little bit broken. So anything like that that's requiring a little bit more thought or higher order thinking, or is utilizing more software stuff as a separate bucket. So if I'm at my computer, I can decide, okay, do I want to look at my computer list of stuff that can be done without an internet connection? Do I want to look at my online list of stuff that is sort of more administrative or ticky-tack? Or do I want to look at my list of stuff that is going to require me to actually log into some software and spend some time thinking through things? So this concept of context is potentially game-changing. I know I found it for myself to be just unbelievably helpful. You can actually prioritize your tasks and get things done when you are at the right spot, rather than just being like, oh, wait, I totally forgot to go get a shovel. Or, you're trying to look through a to-do list of stuff, and it's all these complicated, dense items that require a lot of thought, and all you really have is 5 to 10 minutes, and the best thing for you to do would be to log in and update your billing address for some payment that failed or something like that. So that is stuff that I've been doing for a while. And then the other major insight, and I don't know if he actually phrases this exactly like this, but I think it's really, really important, is that when we're looking at to-do lists, there's a massive difference between different types of processing of tasks, right? So capturing a task is one way of doing things, right? So it's simply taking information or an idea and putting it down somewhere that you're not going to forget it. So, that in that case, we can have something nebulous where it's like, all right, I need to clean out this closet. And that's not a clear next action, but that's a concept that needs to be recorded. It could be, a piece of mail that comes in that needs to be acted on. Okay, we got this letter from the city about some driveway payment. I'm not really sure what's even going on with this. Let me just take a picture of this and put it in my inbox, because I'm going to need to figure out what's actually happening here, right? Maybe someone says something to you like, hey, can you make sure to follow up with this person or whatever? And you're like, yes, sure. Let me just take this down quickly. So this capturing of tasks doesn't require actual processing. It's just getting the information in one spot. Categorizing and processing is a different type of situation where, say, okay, I need to clean out this closet. You put that in your list of stuff to do, and then you actually have to think through, what does this entail? What is the next action that I can actually do to clean out this closet? Are there other actions that are potentially limiting here? When can I do this? Do I need to put this on my calendar? How much time would I need to allocate to this kind of thing? All this processing stuff is really when you think through the amount of time required and then where you can actually do it. So totally separate than capturing, and separating those two is a massive help, because I know that for myself, if I'm trying to capture and categorize things at the same time, then that becomes almost too much mental effort. And then I just will simply leave things and let them sit. Then prioritizing is actually separate from that as well. So prioritizing is when we look at a list of tasks and then decide what we're actually going to do. So this can be related to what we actually have available, right? So the context that I discussed before is an important aspect of prioritization, because, if you are waiting outside at an appointment, then you really only have a few options for things you can do. You can maybe do some administrative tasks on your phone. Maybe you could make a phone call. Maybe you could read something quickly, but you're not going to be able to log into your WordPress site and start updating the theme files or something like that if you have a few minutes at a doctor's office. But prioritization is not necessarily what is most important. It's what is something that you can actually do right now. But then the other aspect too of prioritization is we want to choose things to do that actually move everything else forward. So a lot of times there's tasks that are potentially going to make everything else easier, right? So that's an entirely different discussion. We're not really talking about, the Pareto principle or figuring out what is the highest leverage activity at any given time. But that is something that's different from categorization, because once you have a list of tasks to do, say you wake up in the morning, you look at your to-do list, then you need to actually prioritize, okay, cool, these are my priorities for the day. These are the things that I actually need to get done. This needs to get done because it's urgent and it's due. This needs to get done because it's a long-term play that's going to make everything else easier. But it's important to recognize that that is actually separate from categorizing. And then executing tasks is different from those other pieces as well. It's not the same thing to actually be prioritizing stuff. It's not the same thing to be categorizing it. At some point, you're actually just like going through a to-do list and knocking stuff out, right? There's a point where you're just like, all right, cool. I'm logged into my email. I'm starting at the latest email. By latest, I mean earliest, I suppose, since that's usually what I try to do. But starting at the end of my inbox and just responding to everything one by one. And at that point, you're just trying to go through, knock everything out. So a lot of people, I think, don't recognize that these are all different different pieces, and they're trying to do too many things at once, which then causes them to procrastinate. It causes them to postpone things. It causes them to simply start doing stuff without prioritizing. And having actual separate spaces allocated for each of these different types of task management, as well as understanding that there's different mental energy that's going to be appropriate for doing these different tasks, is hugely, hugely important. So since I reread Getting Things Done, there were at least a few things that I had either sort of gotten sloppy on or things that I was just straight up missing altogether that I've changed over the last probably 2 weeks. And I've noticed just a massive improvement in my own, I guess I can say productivity, but also just peace of mind, right? That a lot of these systems, especially for someone like me who thinks in these like weird to-do lists and thinks in these categories and likes decision trees and all that kind of stuff, is that, I just feel a lot better on a daily basis in terms of what I'm doing and what I'm not doing, because like I said before, I always kind of have this slight nagging feeling that there's something that I should be doing, that I could be doing a little bit more. And I also will tend to overwhelm myself and overbook myself, where it's like, yeah, for sure, I'm going to get up at this time and I'm going to read this much of this book, and then I'm going to listen to this much of a podcast, and I'm going to do these little morning stretches to make sure that my wrist is mobile since I had surgery a year and a half ago. And then I'm going to make sure that I prioritize all my tasks. I'm going to accomplish this for the website. I'm going to make this video. I'm going to schedule this podcast interview. Then I'm going to go to the gym and have these meetings, and I'm going to work out. And you just kind of like line it all up. And then if anything goes wrong or anything takes longer than I think it's going to, I just kind of get myself stuck in a feeling of like, I'm behind, even though these are all sort of expectations I put on myself and there's no real consequences to being quote unquote behind on them. So for me, it's really changed how I feel on a daily basis, and I feel way less, I guess, overwhelmed and frustrated and like I need to constantly be catching up, although that will probably always be part of my personality. And, that's just it's my cross to bear, so to speak. But something I was definitely missing was, like I discussed before, a truly frictionless inbox for simply capturing tasks rather than categorizing them. I had a system that I would utilize in Asana where I would just take in tasks and give them a due date of 4 p.m. for a given day. But then what would happen is that I would just have all these nebulous tasks that were showing up on my daily to-do list, and then categorizing them is a different brain space than, potentially just doing some admin work. So I'd have all this stuff that was kind of messy, and then I would have to either just ignore it or push it to the next day, or try to categorize it in between doing other administrative tasks. And it was just a mess, right? And then that would also cause me either consciously or subconsciously to not be recording tasks or items that I knew needed to end up somehow in my to-do list system, because I could foresee the friction that I was going to feel having that on my to-do list. So I really separated out my inbox and my ability to capture tasks. And that's been a game changer, because now anything that someone gives me, like, hey, I need you to do this, or, I just realized that, this little thing has been bothering me at home, or we need to change this at the gym because, we're running into equipment issues, or I don't like the layout of this. All those things can just be quickly dumped into that spot. And then I know that at some point later, when it's appropriate, I will be able to go in and actually categorize that information and pull out next actions, rather than having it just show up on my to-do list when I'm not actually prepared to do anything about it. So that's been potentially the biggest change for me personally in terms of my own, I guess, feelings surrounding task management. The other major issue I was doing, and this is something that I don't think I ever properly understood from the first time I read the book, is I was using a lot of amorphous categories for projects rather than like discrete completable projects. So David Allen recommends having a list of projects that are something that could be theoretically completed, right? So to give an example of something that I was doing is I was putting categories on my tasks. So it would be something like South Loop website redesign, or Legion group programming launch, or like Rats LP, something like that, it's helpful to have those categorizations and to be able to think through those types of projects, I suppose, in a bigger picture sense in terms of all the different moving parts that need to come together. But none of those things are really things that can be fully checked off. I mean, I guess the like Rats LP could, but that's definitely a much bigger project than something that's like, okay, this is an actually completable, discrete little project. So what I started doing instead is having tasks that are categorized by that bigger picture category, right? Like website redesign or something like that. And then I started having much more clear projects like change the way the blog posts display on the workout blog. Like that's something that could be completed over the course of a week or two if I actually just kind of like kept chipping away at it. So being able to think through these smaller projects inside of a bigger project has really, really been helpful, because I just, would look at these large categories of things. And again, it becomes something that you're sort of numb to. You don't even want to open up the list of everything that needs to happen for the website, because you're like, oh man, I know I'm not going to get any of this done, so I'm not even going to look at it. But if you have the smaller pieces, like change the display of the blog post, if you have something like go in and make sure that the tagging for the email forms is filled out properly, that's something that you can actually do. And even that's not a next action, but that becomes something that can be made up of 5 to 10 next actions, rather than just this stew of roiling tasks that just sort of makes you feel like you're behind and like you're not accomplishing anything. So massively important there for me to actually understand that concept. And I just completely missed that the first time, and I don't think I ever actually implemented that properly. We'll see how that actually affects me, but I think that this will be something that is very, very helpful, just in terms of small chunking work, and then being able to knock it out in more discrete steps, rather than getting lost in the kind of too big of a picture and not feeling like I'm able to really take an action that makes sense in terms of moving the overall project forward. And then, like I mentioned before, I sort of had a tendency to allow too much stuff to creep into my daily to-do list. So David Allen really recommends keeping everything that's not actually due off of your calendar. And for me, since I do use a daily to-do list as well in Asana, which almost functions like a calendar, then I had a lot of stuff that I would allow to creep into that. So if it was something that I sort of thought would be nice to do, or could be a good idea to do, or if I have time on this day, I'll do it, I started allowing those things to collect due dates. So then, I would end up with so much stuff on a given day, right? So let's say Wednesday is a day theoretically during the week in which I would like to handle a lot of higher order, more complicated software-based tasks, right? So like I mentioned before, stuff like updating a website, or working on an integration in Zapier, or recoding certain aspects of a WordPress theme file, anything like that is going to require a certain amount of uninterrupted time and focus, I would try to do on Wednesday. And so over time, I just started to have 15 tasks that would each potentially require 30 minutes to 4 hours of relatively uninterrupted time to figure out. And that would all be set up on a specific day on Wednesday. And there was just no chance I was ever going to be able to do that, right? And so what would end up happening is I would look at this list and I would have to prioritize it, which is fine, right? That's a totally reasonable thing to do. But then I would start to feel bad, because I'd be like, okay, well, maybe I'll get this one, and this one. And then I would inevitably not, and then I would be behind, quote unquote, again. So what I've started doing is relegating those things to their categories, right? And then when I review my different categories and my different tasks and things like that, I can actually push things onto the daily to-do list, in the sense that it's due, where it's like, okay, if we are going to launch this new version of our Elements program on this date, we actually need to have the backend set up on this date. We actually need to have the sheets set up on this date. We need to make sure everyone knows what's going on this date. So those are things that have legitimate to-do dates based upon when we want to launch a project. And, there's a little bit of flexibility there, but it's not the same thing as having all that stuff that needs to happen based upon launching on a certain date, as well as every other thing I would theoretically like to do on the website, sort of cluttering up that list. And simply separating those pieces gives so much more peace of mind, as well as clarity surrounding prioritization, because you have to think through, all right, what is something that needs to happen in order to accomplish something by a certain date, versus what is something that I would like to do if I have the time. And then you can keep checking back and forth between the two. And when something moves from, okay, this is something that's nice to do, versus this is part of a project that needs to move forward, then you can actually put it on a daily to-do list without just, having 15 options of 4-hour tasks that you'd potentially like to do. So those three things I was definitely missing out on. And, I've noticed just a massive change in my state of mind. I don't know if this actually makes me any more productive. I think I was already, at least a reasonably productive person, but I feel much better about what I'm doing. And I think something else that's really important to discuss is that with to-do lists, with exercise routines, with nutrition, I think a lot of people see themselves falling short of their expectations. I know I do all the time, like I've mentioned several times throughout this little rant. And then the response is like, okay, cool. I need to, buckle down and I need to really try harder. And if I just kind of focus and really, put forth some solid effort, I'll be able to get here. And the reality is most of the time is that people are actually trying really hard and they run into limits that are based upon the way that their brain works, right? So we have a limited amount of decisions we can make in a given day. There's decent research on decision fatigue. We run into problems if we have too many choices. There's a book called Paradox of Choice that digs into that. We have limited amounts of willpower in a given day. And there's obviously some iffy stuff there in terms of, okay, well, it's not just like you need to constantly protect your decisions, because if you make a ton of decisions, you actually get better at decision making over time. It's almost like training a muscle. But there is some reality to being limited in terms of how much mental energy you can expend. And then also depending on the time of day, I know for me, if I try to do anything complicated after about 1 or 2 p.m., my brain is just like crawling through a swamp, crawling through quicksand. I can't get anything done. And I can just feel the frustration with myself as I realize just how badly my decision-making process is. So rather than just saying, okay, well, I need to try harder or I need to buckle down, it's much more about recognizing, okay, this is how my brain works, whether or not I like it, and how can I set up my systems so that I am, pushing myself and trying to be a little bit uncomfortable, but I'm not resisting the actual, structure and neurological makeup of human beings for generations. And I think that it's not enough to just want to try harder. You have to say, okay, cool. Well, how can I facilitate myself doing a better job based upon the way that I'm going to behave, whether or not I like it? So in conclusion, Getting Things Done, highly recommended. If you've already read it, read it again. I use Asana for it. I may actually put something up that kind of details how I do it. And I hope everybody gets many things done today, or not, if you've decided that that's not what you want to do today, because you have the authority to prioritize your own life. Hey, this is Todd again, and as most of you know, I consume, read, listen to, watch an absurd amount of content on a regular basis, and a few times per month I send out my thoughts on some of the most interesting or insightful stuff that I've taken a look at. You can be on the list to receive this fascinating, captivating, and delightful information at toddneef.com. That's I before E. Head over there, go ahead and type your email address in, and then as I send these things out, again, a few times a month, you'll get it and you'll be inundated with a carefully curated list of the best stuff that I am experiencing.